The history taught in our schools often feels like a carefully edited chronicle, with all the uncomfortable facts and unexplained events neatly removed. However, the past knows how to keep its secrets, and sometimes artifacts surface that can shatter our familiar picture of the world. One such mysterious document is the so-called Book of Miracles, created in the mid-16th century between 1550 and 1552 in the German city of Augsburg. For a long time, this manuscript remained in the shadows, accessible only to a narrow circle of researchers, but its contents deserve the closest attention of anyone striving to understand the true nature of historical events. It is important to understand that this is not simply a collection of medieval fairy tales, allegories, or religious fantasies designed to frighten the congregation. At its core, it is a documentary chronicle, an attempt to systematize and record phenomena that went beyond the human understanding of that time. People of the 16th century called these miracles or omens because their vocabulary and level of knowledge did not allow for other definitions. But if we look at the described events through the lens of modern experience, technology, and scientific achievements, a completely different, frightening perspective opens up. What was heavenly fire or divine punishment for a medieval chronicler looks to us like a detailed report on the use of high-tech weapons, sightings of unidentified flying objects, and the consequences of global climate shifts. The illustrations and texts of this book transport us to a reality where the laws of physics are violated with alarming regularity. We see evidence of events that modern official science often either ignores or declares a hoax, simply because they do not fit into the approved timeline of civilization's development. How else to explain the appearance in the sky of objects whose maneuvers resemble the piloting of modern fighter jets, or the movement of space stations, thousands of years before the invention of the first airplane? Where do descriptions of explosions comparable in power to tactical nuclear weapons, and the subsequent symptoms suspiciously similar to radiation sickness, come from in medieval chronicles? And, no less disturbingly, where do detailed sketches of creatures that look like they came straight from a mad geneticist's operating table come from? The Book of Miracles asks us uncomfortable questions. Is it possible that our ancestors were witnesses to a war of civilizations that we have forgotten? Or is history cyclical, and technologies we consider achievements of the 21st century were already used on Earth in the distant past, leading to catastrophes whose echoes are recorded on these ancient pages? We are embarking on a journey through the pages of this forgotten archive to reconstruct the picture of a hidden past, step by step. We will analyze reports of ancient unidentified objects, examine evidence of the use of weapons of mass destruction in times when the sword and bow were considered the main armaments, and look into the face of biological anomalies that cannot be explained by natural evolution. Before we open the first page of this terrifying and fascinating chronicle, subscribe to the channel and like this video. Your support helps us dig for the truth that has been hidden for centuries and shed light on the dark spots of our shared history. This investigation will require us to be open-minded and ready to accept facts, no matter how incredible they may seem. Our immersion into the abyss of time begins not with the Middle Ages, but with a much more ancient era, traces of which are also reflected in the Augsburg manuscript. The chronicles return us to the times of antiquity, to show phenomena that once frightened the great Roman Empire. What legionnaires and senators observed in the sky above their heads painfully resembles the operation of complex mechanisms and modern space technologies that have absolutely no place in ancient history textbooks. The chronicles that have come down to us from the depths of the centuries contain descriptions that, upon unbiased examination, baffle even the most skeptical researchers. One of the most striking pieces of evidence is an entry dated 73 BC. According to the text, an event occurred in the territory of the Roman Empire that completely crosses out our ideas about the capabilities of ancient civilization, or who might have visited Earth at that time. Eyewitnesses observed the appearance of a huge golden sphere in the sky. However, this object did not simply fly across the firmament like a comet or meteor. Its behavior demonstrated signs of controlled flight and intelligence. The sphere performed a complex maneuver. It descended smoothly to the very Earth, rolled along the surface, and then, violating the laws of gravity known to us, rose vertically back into the heights, blocking the solar disk. Such behavior cannot be attributed to natural phenomena. Meteorites fall and leave craters. They do not return to the stratosphere. The description of a golden sphere capable of changing trajectory, hovering, and blocking the luminary suggests a giant aircraft whose hull reflected the sun's rays. Interestingly, chroniclers link this phenomenon to the beginning of a great war, as if the object's arrival was a harbinger or catalyst for subsequent conflicts. But if such visits were rare in antiquity, by the 16th century, the skies over Europe had turned into a veritable arena of combat operations using technologies that humanity would only master centuries later. Let us move to 1531, to Portugal. The Lisbon chronicles of that time recorded an incident that ufologists today would unequivocally classify as the crash of a large, unidentified object. A giant object appeared in the sky above the city, which frightened residents compared to a whale. This comparison is extremely important for understanding the mindset of people of that era. They described the unknown through images they understood. A cigar-shaped or oval hull could indeed resemble a sea leviathan. However, subsequent events exclude any biological interpretations. This sky whale was caught in a powerful vortex or force field, after which it crashed or disappeared, causing catastrophic consequences on the ground. The crash was accompanied by a massive seismic shock. An earthquake destroyed about 200 houses, and more than 1,000 people died under the rubble. Aftershocks continued for another 8 days, felt not only in Portugal, but also on the coast of Africa. This indicates that the object possessed enormous mass or energy, the release of which led to tectonic shifts. It is unlikely that an atmospheric phenomenon or a mirage could cause such massive physical destruction of urban infrastructure. No less alarming are the reports of celestial battles that were massively recorded in different parts of Europe in the first half of the 16th century. In 1536 in Spain, and then in 1545 in Poland and Germany, people observed not just flashes in the skies, but structured battles. The descriptions are full of details that are hard to write off as a trick of the imagination. Witnesses spoke of flaming citadels hanging in the clouds, and warriors in shining armor fighting with fiery swords. If we translate these metaphors into modern language, the citadel turns into a mothership or orbital station, armor into hermetic spacesuits or exoskeletons, and fiery swords into beam weapons or plasma cutters. Particularly suspect is the case in Poland, where eyewitnesses reported a loud crash, similar to thunder, which preceded the appearance in the sky of 3 red crosses and the figure of a warrior who was attacked by numerous enemy forces. The battle lasted several hours, until the middle of the day. The sound accompaniment in the form of a crash confirms the physical nature of the phenomenon. It was not an optical illusion or fata morgana. Most likely, the inhabitants of medieval Europe became unwitting spectators of a full-scale technogenic conflict in the Earth's atmosphere, involving cross-shaped aircraft and landing parties. Interpreting what they saw as a religious sign, people tried to find protection in faith, not realizing that a high-intensity conflict was unfolding over their heads. These celestial battles could not pass without leaving a trace on the planet. If powerful energy weapons were used in the stratosphere and lower layers of the atmosphere, if apparatuses were shot down and citadels exploded, then debris and damaging elements inevitably reached the surface. And indeed, an analysis of the chronicles shows that following the observations of wars in the sky, a real hell began on Earth. If there was a war in the sky, then something more terrible than ordinary hail must have fallen to the ground. And the Chronicles of 1009 describe a strike that, by its characteristics and consequences, we would unhesitatingly call nuclear today. If one carefully reads the Chronicles of 1009 presented in the Augsburg manuscript, it becomes obvious that humanity faced an event going far beyond ordinary natural cataclysms. The description left by the chroniclers is frightening in its detail, and how much it resonates with modern concepts of global man-made disasters. According to the text, in that year, the sun suddenly darkened, and the moon took on a blood-red hue. Usually, such atmospheric phenomena accompany massive emissions of ash or dust into the stratosphere, which is typical for volcanic eruptions or extremely powerful explosions. However, the key element of this entry is the description of the object that caused the disaster. It was not a stone, not a star, and not a comet that fell from the heavens. Eyewitnesses describe a huge column or tower of fire. This is an extremely specific detail. Natural meteorites entering the dense layers of the atmosphere look like glowing balls or streaks, but certainly not vertical, geometrically correct structures. The mention of a tower or column suggests that we are talking about an artificial cylindrical object, be it a giant rocket, a landing module, or a warhead of colossal power. The moment of impact of this object with the Earth's surface caused an immediate and destructive earthquake covering vast territories. This points to a kinetic strike of incredible force, capable of shaking tectonic plates. But the worst began after the impact. The chronicles dispassionately state that the fall of the column was followed by mass death among the population. In Germany and Italy, regions that were at the epicenter or in the affected zone, mortality statistics reached monstrous figures. The chronicler claims that more people died than remained alive. The causes of this mass extinction are described quite vaguely, but the symptoms give pause for thought. Besides the immediate victims of the earthquake and fires, people began to die from unknown diseases accompanied by pestilence. If we consider the hypothesis of the use of weapons of mass destruction, the picture comes together into a single puzzle. The shockwave destroys cities, thermal radiation causes fires, and subsequent radioactive contamination or chemical poisoning of the area leads to the long and painful death of survivors, which medieval doctors could mistake for the plague or God's punishment. The darkening of the sun also fits into this theory. The rising of millions of tons of dust and soot could cause a nuclear winter effect, which only worsened the situation of the survivors. But if the event of 1009 resembles uncontrolled chaos or a strategic area strike, then the incident that occurred 5 centuries later, in 1546, looks like a surgically precise military operation. The location is Mechelen, the territory of the present-day Netherlands. In August of that year, fire from the sky, again this mysterious phrasing, struck a specific point in the city. This point turned out to be a tower where a strategic reserve of gunpowder was stored, more than 400 tons. The explosion was of such force that half the city was destroyed instantly. The official version of the time, of course, wrote everything off as lightning and a special sign from God. However, the probability that ordinary lightning would hit precisely the single object whose destruction would inflict maximum damage on the region's defense capability is negligibly small. In the context of the endless celestial wars described in the same book, this incident looks like the intentional liquidation of an ammunition depot. Someone with the ability to launch precision strikes from the air decided to disarm one of the sides of the conflict, or prevent a brewing war by simply destroying gunpowder reserves with one shot. This is no longer a blind element, but a calculated use of force, resembling modern drone attacks or the use of high-precision missiles. Such coincidences, when heavenly fire selectively hits military targets, force us to reconsider the entire history of military conflicts of that time. Perhaps many accidental explosions of gunpowder warehouses and arsenals were not accidental at all. But the use of such destructive weapons, be it the nuclear strike of 1009 or the pinpoint bombings of the 16th century, could not pass without a trace for the planet's ecosystem. After such releases of energy, nature could not remain the same, and the ecological catastrophes described in the book look like direct and inevitable consequences of these strikes. After the use of destructive weapons and massive clashes in the skies witnessed by the Chronicles, nature could not remain the same. The planet, subjected to colossal energetic and likely chemical impact, reacted with a series of ecological catastrophes that looked like the onset of the apocalypse to the people of that time. The Augsburg manuscript dispassionately records these anomalies, and upon close examination, they surprisingly coincide with what modern science describes as the consequences of nuclear winter, radiation contamination, or the use of climate weapons. One of the most frightening omens frequently mentioned in ancient texts is the so-called blood rains. Precipitation of an unnatural red color fell in different regions of Europe, causing panic. Even more gruesome is the description of bread which, when cut, began to exude a liquid resembling blood, as if from an open wound. Skeptics might write this off as the activity of bacteria causing pigmentation, but in the context of global cataclysms, this phenomenon takes on a different meaning. The red color of precipitation and water often indicates a high content of iron oxides or other chemical compounds in the atmosphere, which is typical for territories after powerful explosions or releases of toxic substances. The water used to knead the dough already carried this invisible poison, turning food into venom. The atmosphere, saturated with ash and reagents, spawned monstrous weather anomalies. The Chronicles describe hail that did not just beat down crops, but literally destroyed vegetation at the root. In one case, stones fell from the sky for 7 days in a row. This does not fit the picture of an ordinary storm front. The description of sharp stones suggests that it was not ice crashing down on the earth, but fragments of hard rock or artificial origin, thrown into the stratosphere by a blast wave and now returning. The climate was feverish. Periods of unbearable heat were replaced by sudden anomalous cold. In 1162 in Milan, snow fell 12 times in a row, burying houses and trees. People found themselves trapped in their own homes, falling into despair from the inability to get out. Such a picture is typical of a volcanic or nuclear winter, when a dense veil of clouds blocks sunlight, causing abrupt global cooling. In 1126, the winter was so severe and sudden that birds froze right in the air and fell to the ground like stones. But before that, as if having gone mad, they began to kill each other in flight. Such aggressive animal behavior is often linked to the impact of strong electromagnetic fields or poisoning by neurotoxins sprayed in the air. Another proof of the toxic nature of this precipitation is the incident of 1552 in Holland. After a terrible storm, which locals mistook for Judgment Day, heavy stones weighing several kilograms fell to earth. The most important thing in this description is not the weight of the stones, but that the place where they fell exuded an unbearable stench. This smell was so poisonous that it caused illness and death. Ordinary meteorites or hail do not possess such properties. This is a direct indication of chemical contamination. Containers with poisonous substances or debris of mechanisms containing toxic fuel were falling from the sky. Pest infestations also took on grotesque forms. In 864, Gaul was covered by clouds of locusts, which chroniclers describe as creatures with wings and 2 teeth. These creatures covered the ground like snow, destroying everything in their path. But their death turned out to be even more terrible than their life. When the swarm was carried out to sea and drowned, the surf threw their bodies onto the shore. The decomposition of this biomass caused such a stench that the air became deadly to humans, causing a massive pestilence. It creates the impression that the ecosystem itself was disrupted at a fundamental level. However, radiation and poisons affect not only the weather or animal behavior. They change the very structure of life, rewriting the genetic code of organisms. The illustrations of monsters in this book suggest terrible genetic experiments, the results of which wandered through medieval Europe. But if atmospheric phenomena and climate shifts can still be written off as nature's whims, the changes that touched living organisms make one shudder. Radiation and toxic substances released into the environment do not just poison water and air, they invade the very structure of life, breaking the genetic code and spawning creatures that have no place in a normal biological hierarchy. The pages of the Augsburg manuscript are replete with images and descriptions that, at a cursory glance, seem like the ravings of a madman or illustrations for myths. However, if viewed through the prism of genetics and the consequences of man-made disasters, a picture of massive mutagenesis engulfing Europe emerges. In January 1496, when the waters of the Tiber overflowed its banks and flooded the vicinity of Rome, something was discovered on the muddy bottom after the elements receded that plunged the residents into shock. Chroniclers recorded the find of a creature that would be called a chimera today. This was not the decomposed body of a known animal. The description contains detailed characteristics pointing to a mixture of features of completely different biological species in one organism. Eyewitnesses of those years perceived this as a bad omen, but from a modern point of view, the find looks like the result of crude genetic interference or severe mutation caused by external factors. The creature found in the mud of the Tiber could have been a victim of radiation exposure during the embryonic development stage, when the organism's defense mechanisms failed and nature suffered a tragic glitch. Such anomalies were not limited to the animal world. The human population also underwent terrible changes. In 1531, a so-called forest man was caught in the woods near Salzburg. Chronicles describe him as a creature with a human face, but covered in thick fur, with altered body proportions. He was delivered to the local ruler, but the creature refused all food and drink, soon fading away. Was this a feral hermit? Unlikely, given the physiological differences. Rather, we are talking about a manifestation of atavism, or mutation caused by prolonged residence in a contaminated zone. In those same years, births of children with congenital deformities, fused bodies, extra limbs, or missing vital organs were recorded with frightening frequency. Medieval doctors meticulously documented these cases, and their records resemble reports from ecological disaster zones of the 20th century. The sky over Europe in those years was also inhabited by creatures that, it would seem, should have disappeared millions of years ago or existed only in legends. In 1533, a phenomenon was observed in Bohemia that cannot be explained by mass hallucination. Flying lizards, which locals called dragons, appeared in the air. It is important to note the scale. This was not a solitary mythical beast guarding treasures, but flocks. Hundreds of creatures, large and small, migrated like migratory birds. This description indicates the existence of a stable population of flying reptiles in the heart of Europe just 500 years ago. Where did these species disappear to? Probably, they became the first victims of that same climate change and toxic atmospheric pollution we spoke of earlier. Their bodies could not withstand the abrupt change in habitat conditions. The seas also washed riddles ashore. In Venice and other coastal cities, creatures resembling hybrids of human and fish were found. One could attribute this to marine mammals, but the detail of the sketches casts doubt. And on land, nature, as if mocking, created mutant plants. In Flanders, wheat grew with 11 ears on one stalk, a clear sign of polyploidy, often occurring under the influence of mutagenic factors. And in other regions, grapevines bore fruit covered with hair. The world of the past captured in this book was completely different, stranger, more dangerous, and genetically unstable. It seems that reality itself was bursting at the seams. But the greatest mystery lies not even in the monsters or the celestial battles. It is hidden in the numbers. One small, inconspicuous caption under a picture in this book is capable of completely overturning our understanding of chronology and making us doubt when exactly all these events took place. The deepest and most disturbing mystery that the Augsburg Book of Miracles conceals has no claws, wings, or fiery breath. It hides not in frightening illustrations, but in dry lines of text, in numbers and dates, which, upon careful study, can cause real vertigo and destroy the foundation of our knowledge about human chronology. We are used to perceiving the historical timeline as an unshakable constant, a straight line going from the past to the future. But what if this line was artificially torn, glued back together, or intentionally stretched to hide the true proximity of catastrophic events? There is an entry in the manuscript dated 195 AD. It describes the appearance of two strange sea creatures in human form off the coast of an island near Venice. In itself, this description fits into the general series of biological anomalies, but the accompanying text contains a detail that explodes official history from within. The author of the Chronicle nonchalantly states that this event occurred in the times of Muhammad. Here lies a colossal chronological paradox that cannot be explained by a simple copyist's error. According to the generally accepted canonical version of history, the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam, passed away in 632 AD. The difference between the date in the book, 195 AD, and the official dating of the Prophet's life is more than 400 years. This is not a margin of error of a couple of decades. This is the disappearance of 4 whole centuries. How could a 16th century chronicler, an educated man with access to archives, make such a monstrous inaccuracy? Or is there no inaccuracy here, and we are facing evidence that real chronology is significantly shorter than the one we are taught? The time shift hypothesis, also known as the phantom time hypothesis, suggests that the period of the early Middle Ages, the so-called Dark Ages, was artificially written into history. If we accept the date from the Book of Miracles as truth, it turns out that events attributed to the 7th century actually took place in the 2nd or 3rd century, or the chronology itself was shifted. This means that the Roman Empire and the rise of Islam, as well as subsequent events, are much closer to each other in time than is commonly believed. 400 years of extra history could have been added by chroniclers of later eras for political or religious motives, to make dynasties more ancient or legitimize power. This assumption finds indirect confirmation in other oddities of the manuscript. In descriptions of events of the 15th and 16th centuries, names and titles characteristic of deep antiquity surprisingly surface. For example, the text mentions Pliny the Elder, the famous Roman writer and polymath. Officially, he died during the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD. However, in the context of the book, his name figures in events occurring more than 1,000 years after his alleged death, and he is mentioned as if he were a contemporary of the described cataclysms or a recently departed authority. Moreover, the description of the eruption of Vesuvius itself in the Book of Miracles is attributed to the late Middle Ages, although official geology and history claim that the volcano was dormant during this period. The description of the disaster in Campania, where fire burned cities and villages, painfully resembles the destruction of Pompeii, but is dated to a completely different era. A strong impression is created that antiquity and the Renaissance are not two eras separated by a millennium of darkness, but periods standing almost right next to each other. If we remove these phantom 400 years, history compresses like a spring. The technologies of the Romans, like the Golden Sphere, turn out to be the direct predecessors of 16th century events. Celestial battles and the use of weapons of mass destruction become the cause of the fall of that same unified ancient world which we know by different names. A global catastrophe causing mutations and climate change threw humanity back in development, and the survivors were forced to rewrite history from scratch, filling the gaps with fictional centuries to hide the horror of the collapse that occurred. We look at these pages and see not a distant past, but a mirror reflection of events that were much closer to us. When we close the heavy, metaphorical cover of the Augsburg Book of Miracles, we are left with the feeling that we have touched something forbidden, knowledge that was not intended for the general public. This manuscript, gathering dust for centuries in private collections and archives, turns out to be not just a collection of religious horror stories or tall tales. It is a surviving witness, the black box of a lost civilization, which impartially recorded the moments of its agony and collapse. Before us stands a picture of a world that survived a global war using technologies we are only beginning to master again, a planetary-scale catastrophe, and possibly an artificial alteration of the flow of time itself. We must understand that we are looking at events of the past through the prism of a medieval person's perception. The artist and chronicler of the 16th century did not have the words rocket, radiation, genetic mutation, or spaceship in their lexicon. They saw the world through images of religion, mythology, and daily life understandable to them. When a ballistic missile fell from the sky, they drew a fiery column or tower. When a beam weapon burned cities, they saw in it the sword of the Lord. When radiation distorted the human form, they drew demons and chimeras. But if we cast aside this veneer of medieval allegory and look at the essence of the described phenomena, a frightening truth opens up. Our ancestors lived in the shadow of a high-tech past, the remnants of which destroyed them at every step. This document forces us to reconsider the very concept of historical progress. We were taught that humanity developed linearly from primitive tools to smartphones and spaceflights. However, the Book of Miracles screams the opposite. History is cyclical. What we consider the pinnacle of progress may have already existed, been used, and become the cause of the destruction of the previous era. Celestial battles, pinpoint strikes on arsenals, climate changes caused by atmospheric pollution, all this has already happened. We, like children who have lost their memory, wander among the ruins of giants, mistaking their destroyed machines for miracles or divine signs. And the most terrible thing in this realization is that we seem to be repeating this scenario with frightening accuracy, again accumulating weapons capable of turning blooming cities into radioactive ash, which future chroniclers will again call heavenly wrath. The riddle of the chronological shift we spoke of only heightens the anxiety. If there is no chasm of thousands of years between us and these events, if antiquity and the Renaissance are separated only by a thin line of catastrophe, then our position is much more precarious than it seems. The phantom centuries written into textbooks serve only one purpose: to calm us, to push the horror of the past as far away as possible, to turn a real tragedy into a safe myth. But artifacts like this book destroy this illusion of safety. They remind us that civilization is fragile, and miracles are often just misunderstood technologies and forgotten nightmares. This investigation is only the first step in an attempt to reassemble the shards of history's broken mirror. Hidden in this book are many more secrets that require careful study and comparison with other sources. We have only lifted the veil behind which the true face of our past is hiding. If you also believe that official history is full of gaps and omissions, if the facts presented in this material made you think about the nature of reality, share this video with friends and like-minded people. The more people ask the right questions, the faster we can reconstruct the true picture. Write in the comments which of the described miracles seem to you the most plausible proof of the existence of ancient technologies. Celestial battles, the nuclear strike of 1009, or genetic experiments. Your opinion is important for the continuation of our search. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the second part of the breakdown, where we will delve into even darker secrets of forgotten eras. Until we meet again on the ruins of the old world, in search of the truth.